Welcome to the Heal Your Heartbreak podcast with your host, Breakup Bestie, aka me, Kendra. Breakups are hard, but you don't have to do it alone. Each week, I will be taking you through a different topic as it relates to breaking up, healing from heartbreak, growing in your single life, dating, and getting back into happier and healthier relationships. The goal of this show is to provide support, hope, tips, and to remind you that above all, this too shall pass. Happy New Year and welcome back to another episode of the Heal Your Heartbreak podcast. It is officially a new year. I'm sure we were all very okay with saying goodbye to 2020. So we officially made it, and today's episode is, in my opinion, probably one of the most important episodes that I will do, and let me tell you why. Today I'm interviewing Dr. Jamie Zuckerman, who is a Philadelphia-based licensed clinical psychologist in a private practice. She specializes in the treatment of adults with mood disorders, anxiety, relationship difficulties, and psychological symptoms associated with medical illness. She is a frequent speaker and media contributor of mental health topics to several online publications, TV, radio, and podcasts. And I'm going to tell you why today's episode is so important. Today, we're talking about narcissism and toxic relationships. If you've listened to this podcast at all, you know that that's something that I experienced. And I don't believe it's talked about enough. We have come a long way in discussing narcissistic relationships, verbally and emotionally abusive relationships. We've come a long way in the last 10 years. And I will say I got into my toxic and abusive relationship starting in 2009 and ended it in 2012. And I had no idea that it was so common. I had no idea what it entailed. From my perspective, I thought abusive relationships were just what I saw in movies, where there was bruising and black eyes, and it was just this physically abusive kind of a thing. I had no idea how common grooming and emotional abuse and verbal abuse and narcissism and all of those things that I ended up experiencing. I had no idea how common they were. And because of that, I felt so entirely alone, not only in the relationship, but also afterwards. And it wasn't until I started speaking up and telling loved ones about what happened to me, and then, speaking up a little bit more publicly when I started Breakup Bestie, that I was finally able to see that I was nowhere near alone. So just as a warning on this episode, we do talk about that. We talk about what are narcissists? What does a narcissistic relationship look like? What does a toxic relationship look like? In today's world, we throw around those terms a lot now, I feel like. And so I asked Dr. Z, what does it really look like? How can we tell if a relationship is narcissistic or toxic? We talk about healing from that. We talk about how to not repeat that pattern again, because unfortunately, that's something that we see a lot. So I get really personal in this episode. I share a lot about what my relationship looked like. I, share about where the relationship took me, and it took me to some really, really dark places. So I did want to put a little bit of a warning on that. But I will also say that even if you have not experienced a toxic relationship, give this a listen anyway. It is such an important topic, because I think not only will it help you understand what it is, but it'll also help shed some light on if you ever have a friend that's in a narcissistic relationship or a family member. I can't tell you how many times, we hear friends of people like that saying, why don't you just leave? And there's so many things that go into relationships like this. So just getting some context of the mental manipulation, the grooming that goes into these things, I think will help equip you to be a good listener and a good friend and be able to help someone in that kind of situation. So I feel so honored that Dr. Z came on the show today. And even though it has been, 8 years since I have seen or spoken to my narcissistic ex, and even though I have spent a lot of time learning about what these relationships are like and why I ended up in one of them, and I've gone through so much therapy and so much healing on it, I still learned so much from talking to her, and I feel like I have an even better understanding of what it looked like. And the reason I think it's so important is because if I had heard this episode 10 years ago, I'm not sure if I would have gone through 3 years of trauma. I mentioned it in the episode, but I ended up Googling at one point, like, am I in an abusive relationship? I just had no idea what it looked like. So this episode goes out to anyone that is in that kind of a relationship or will ever be like that in the future. This kind of awareness and breaking the stigma of these kind of relationships is so important to me. It's a very important part of why I wanted to start Breakup Bestie. So please give it a listen, and I hope you guys like it and learn as much as I did. Well, welcome, Dr. Z, to the Heal Your Heartbreak podcast. So happy to have you on today and talk about this topic.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm very excited to talk about this and to answer your questions because I know that what you do and what you talk about has been super helpful for many people. So I'm thankful to be on.
Oh, thank you. And can you start by telling a little bit about yourself, what you do? If you're not already following her on Instagram, I'll have it in the show notes. You have to. You post the most amazing things. So,
Oh, thank you.
yeah, if you could just say a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Sure. So my name's Dr. Jamie Zuckerman. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist. I practice right outside Philadelphia. I have a private practice and I see adults 18 and older, primarily, all anxiety disorders, mood disorders, and a lot of relationship patterns and dynamics that, somebody will come into my office and say that they're stuck in this relationship and they don't know what to do or how to get out or how to stay in it. And so I break down their patterns, break down their history of patterns, and really work on changing that and shifting gears and developing some insight. So the other thing I do is I have a small specialty in clinical health psychology. So I work with people who have chronic and physical, medical, long-term illnesses, particularly neurological issues. I used to work in a neurology practice, so I kind of developed this specialty for patients with epilepsy, MS, and things like that. So, and also just for the simple reason that majority of people I see with depression and anxiety most often have some sort of comorbid medical condition that's usually enhanced by stress because we can't really separate the two. So,
Wow, that's so interesting. And that's something I've learned more in recent years is just the connection between mental health and
oh
physical health. And
yeah,
I like look
yeah.
back to, we'll dive into it, but like into my abusive relationship.
hmm
I had the craziest stomach issues, and I went to
I was
the
just gonna say IBS, migraines, joint pain, autoimmune stuff, all of
Yeah, so I remember I went to a
it.
gastroenterologist, and he basically said that my stomach looked like someone who'd been drinking for 10 years because it was just so
hmm
inflamed, and because I was
Yep.
so stressed
Yep.
and
I
just
believe it.
from being in that. So that's such an
hmm
interesting connection that you're able to help with both. And
hmm
so we're going to talk about toxic relationships today, and it's such a buzzword, I mean, fortunately or
hmm
unfortunately, I think it probably goes
Right.
to both sides where there's a lot more of an awareness of what that looks like. But I wanted to start off by asking you, this phrase a toxic relationship is thrown around so much these
hmm
days. Can you describe like what a toxic relationship is? And even further, would love for you to clarify the difference between a narcissist and I think
Yes.
you mentioned it on your stories, like, what's the difference between a narcissist and just an asshole?
Yes. 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 best question I ever got from a follower. How do you
Yeah.
know if you're dating a narcissist or he's just an asshole?
Yeah.
Sure. So toxic relationships is a, as you said, it's a very thrown around term, and it's going to mean something different to everybody, um, because the patterns that each couple have are unique to that relationship and unique to that dynamic. So what's toxic for me in a relationship may not be the same as what's toxic for you, because each person's bringing to the relationship their baggage, and we all have baggage. So we each get to this relationship, and if our baggage doesn't connect or even out or neutralize, then toxicity can start to arise. But generally speaking, a toxic relationship is one where um, both people are routinely unsettled in the relationship, don't feel heard, don't feel respected. Um, when there's fear of the other person, fear of voicing your concerns, fear of voicing your opinions, um, being made to feel like you have low self worth. So basically, a relationship that does not enhance your life, I would consider a toxic relationship. Now, that doesn't mean it's not workable, and there's obviously different levels of toxic relationships. But even the most, the most benign form of toxicity, it's still so relevant to the person, and it it's just all relative. So just because you think your toxic relationship isn't as bad as your best friend's toxic relationship, it doesn't mean that it's not toxic for you. So that's the point I definitely want to get across. But really, it's, if the relationship doesn't enhance your life in any way, it's toxic to it.
Yeah. No, that definitely makes sense. And it's, I remember being in my relationship and literally going on Google and asking like, is my relationship
Yes.
toxic? And
Yes.
it was hard to find information because it was, so, and being in it, I couldn't
Yeah.
see it
Correct.
as it
Correct.
was. But yeah, I remember literally like Googling it and trying to diagnose it
Mhm.
from the internet. And I really
Mhm.
couldn't figure it out because it's just so different for
It's
everyone.
so different, and you were probably trying to find some similarities so you can kind of hang your hat on and say, okay, oh, this is what I'm dealing with. But as you know, in toxic relationships, especially with someone very unhealthy and toxic, it shifts so fast that before you think one thing's toxic, the next thing it's done with and it's over with, and then all of a sudden there's something else, and so you can't even really pinpoint what is toxic, but rather it's the whole relationship itself, the whole pattern of the relationship.
Yeah. Yeah, and then, I'm gonna ask you about this later on, but,
Hmm.
there's so much that goes into it with grooming and, like, I
Yep.
find most toxic relationships start off amazing, like,
Amazing. Amazing.
amazing. Yeah,
That's
and
right.
so you're, like, completely swept
Yep.
off your feet, and then all of a
Too good to be
sudden
true.
too good to be true, and then all of us
Hmm.
and I can specifically remember
Yep.
the day mine
Yep.
switched. It
Yep.
was it was just like it was
Yes.
one moment and it never got better. It, like,
And
never
that's it.
returned back.
Yes, and that's the characteristic of again, when you want me to, I'll go into it, but the difference between someone who has narcissistic traits, someone who's an asshole versus someone who has narcissistic personality disorder. That flip of a switch and never returning to that false baseline, that is characteristic of a narcissistic personality disorder, because that initial love bombing stage, we call it, right? That initial stage of grooming is not them. That is a strategy that they're using. They're faking it till they get you in, and then the real them shows. And what happens is the person in the relationship keeps trying so hard to get the person back to how they used to be. What they don't understand is that's not who they ever were. It was like they put on a brown wig, took it off, and say, "Really, I have blonde hair." And you're like, "But please, I want you to go back to brown hair again." It never was.
Yeah, no, that's 100%. And it makes sense because, I was in that relationship for 3 years, so it's not like he was just having a bad day for two and a
No,
half of them. It
correct.
was like he was
Right.
really putting on
That's
an
who he was.
act for
Yes.
6 months and then
Right.
went into this other
Yep.
person, and I was, I stuck around to try to get back to those
Get
6
back to
months.
that.
And,
'Cause it's
but yeah, if
it becomes almost an addiction.
it was an addiction,
Mhm,
100%. It was an addiction, and
mhm,
I also am a recovering addict alcoholic, so I can see it
mhm,
so clearly now, like,
mhm,
the
mhm.
rationalization,
Yes,
doing like, trying to make it anyone else's fault
yeah,
except my
fault,
own, like, even my own,
which
like, I
isolates you. right?
Exactly.
And it's
Exactly.
exhausting.
Yeah. Yeah, so could you kinda get into, what are some of the characteristics of the narcissist?
hmm So I like to look at narcissism on a continuum. So on one end, you have extremely dependent, and on the other end, you have narcissistic personality disorder. And this is why a lot of times someone with narcissistic personality disorder tends to gravitate towards someone who's extremely dependent, because that dependent person is very okay with putting their needs second and taking care of this narcissist. And the narcissist loves that. But the danger with that is that eventually, by doing that in that pattern, that dependent person will slowly start to feel like their sense of self is just not even existent. They're just a shell. And so that dynamic is probably, I would say, this is not research based, but just anecdotally and what I see in people that I've worked with, that is the most toxic dynamic and the hardest one to work through, the dependent personality disorder style and the narcissistic personality style. Um, so narcissism, I look at it a continuum. Every single one of us has narcissistic traits. All of us do. Um, People that are CEOs of companies, people that are, anyone who's running for president of the United States, they all have narcissistic features, right? Like um, people that are in charge of companies or have their own brands. You have to have some level of narcissistic traits to be able to get to that successful place. You just do. And it's not a bad thing because you're using those narcissistic traits for healthy purposes. They motivate you, they give you a little bit of an edge. But the difference is that when you're home with your children and those narcissistic traits are no longer necessary, you're able to shift them back into, let's say, parent mode. Whereas somebody with narcissistic personality disorder, there is no shifting of anything. And if they are shifting it, it's manipulative. So people that
Mm,
have narcissistic traits, those traits come out in different areas as needed. And that is healthy, it's balanced, it's appropriate. And then as you go down further, you gain not only more narcissistic traits more frequently, but also lack of insight. So as you go down to dependency, lack of insight. As you move towards the middle, appropriate insight. And then towards the end, narcissistic personality disorder, absolutely zero insight. Um, and somebody who says, is he just an asshole or is he a narcissist? My question to them is always, is the asshole behavior that you're talking about because he cheated on you or because he lied to you? Does he have difficult relationships with everybody in his life? Or was this kind of isolated just to your relationship? And if it was isolated just to the relationship, then you know what? Then it just wasn't the right relationship. He didn't know how to handle it. He made a stupid mistake. He's an asshole for doing it, but it doesn't define his personality style. And sometimes it's hard to obviously deal with. You'd almost would rather than be like that to everybody. But sometimes people have the tendency, and I understand why, to just label somebody as a narcissist because they have issues with infidelity.
yeah.
It's not the same thing. They could have bipolar disorder. They could be depressed, or they could just not be into the relationship. There's a million different reasons. Narcissistic personality disorder is zero awareness of just how serious the impact and the consequences of their behaviors are, zero remorse,
Mm,
zero willingness to change. And people say, well, can't they change? No, I'm making a blanket statement. Someone with narcissistic personality disorder will never, ever, ever change, ever. So unless you're willing to stay in the relationship and figure out how to live with that's fine. But to wait for them or expect them to change, it will never happen. And if they act as if they're changing, it's a show because they need something from you in that moment. You only exist to them as much as they need you for a certain purpose. If they feel you're leaving, they will manipulate you back in. They will make you feel so empty. They will confuse you so much on your reality that you don't even know, are you wrong? Are you right? Did that really happen? Well, maybe I am crazy. And you're asking your friends, but your friends are sick of it because they've kind of mastered this plan to isolate you from your friends. So you have no one to go to. And when you finally get out of the relationship, women that I see, they feel like a shell. They don't even know what their favorite color is anymore. So there is a big difference between somebody being an asshole, somebody being a really relentless CEO of a company, and someone having narcissistic personality disorder. There's a big difference. They will not change. There is a distinct period where that switch goes off. And the biggest thing to differentiate between someone just having narcissistic tendencies or being an asshole, someone with the personality disorder will be that way all the time with everyone around them, not just their significant other.
That makes so much sense. And I wanted to ask, so okay, so they will not change. Are they
Mhm.
capable of having an awareness of what they're doing?
Yes, they know
Okay.
exactly what they're doing.
They know exactly what they're doing.
They know
Okay.
what what the awareness of is that they don't have awareness as to why they are narcissists. Because in order to understand why you're a narcissist, you have to admit to your vulnerability and your flaws, which a narcissist will not do, which is why they develop that exterior. So it would mean that this narcissist would have to become so vulnerable and let down their guard and all their defenses and then work their way back up. And the way that the personality disorder is set up, it blocks that from happening. It would never happen. And I know I get, some criticism for saying that. A lot of psychologists do, because it's usually coming from people who are in relationships with narcissists, because it really kind of takes away that hope. Um, but I'm really saying it because it's true, and maybe not now, but maybe down the road, it sinks into somebody, and somebody can take something from it.
Yeah. Yeah, and I it's interesting. I've it's just the last week I've been getting so many questions on what I think about soulmates and twin flames and that whole concept, and I'm like, "You know what? I don't believe in that." And what I
Mhm.
do believe is that the only time I've ever used that word is when I was in a
Mhm.
toxic relationship, because
Correct.
it just
Yes.
allowed me to excuse
Yes.
every bad behavior.
Thank you. Yes. So, yes, for those listening, that is probably one of the most important red flags. If you are discussing soulmates at any point in a relationship, I'd say from like the first 6 months, 6 to 8 months, if the word soulmate comes up at all, that is a massive red flag. If you're talking about how your kids will look, what type of house you're going to buy, all that future promising, it's called future faking, all these things that are going on initially, they may feel so good. And they may make you feel like you are so loved and you found the one, and they oddly agree with you on everything. They have all the same interests as you. They like the same food as you, and it just seems too good to be true. And again, this is not to be pessimistic, but that's just not how relationships work. And it's hard because you really want to feel that fairy tale feeling, but soulmate is unfortunately, I think you can feel really connected to somebody, but I also think you can feel really connected to a lot of people, as you should, because you should never just have one person that you put all your eggs in one basket. And I don't even mean intimate, I just mean your self worth, your sense of self. It should be divided across many people, not just one. And if you find that it's just one, chances are that's a toxic relationship, because the other person wouldn't want that for you either.
Yeah,
If my
exactly.
husband was solely dependent on me, like I would want spread it out. I have friends I talk to about this. I have, I have friends I talk to about this. You don't want to put it all in one thing. And if you do, and the other person thinks that's normal too, you end up isolating yourself slowly without realizing it from friends and family. It's like a bar that goes up every so often. And before you know it, 2 years later, you're in this cage and you can't go anywhere.
Yep, I mean, that's 100% what happened to me. I literally lost I mean, he had me change my phone number,
Hmm.
delete my social media.
Hmm.
I mean, I literally just, like, I had best friends. I didn't give
Yes.
any ex I just jumped off the face of the earth to them,
Hmm.
and it was because he wanted us to be a team.
Yes,
He
you and him
told
against the world.
exactly. He
Yep.
told me that, it's not, and I in my case also, we had a large age gap. I was really young, and I had never really been in a serious relationship, so I took
Mhm,
everything he said to be
mhm,
fact because I'm like, "I'm
mhm,
young, I don't know what I'm talking about,"
mhm.
and he told me, like,
But that was probably part of it. That was part
it's
of
not
the
appropriate to talk to other people about your relationship.
wow,
So I'm like, "Okay." You just never
okay.
okay, you
Mhm,
never talk to them about it. So I walked
right.
around as a shell full of secrets and shame and
Yes.
all that stuff. So it's and that kind of leads me to my next question. So you touched on it a little bit, but you know, being in that situation, like that feeling of constantly walking on eggshells, you talked a little bit about like disconnected from reality. What happens to a person when they're in that for an extended period of time?
To the person with the personality disorder or their partner?
Their partner. So like, messes with reality,
Yeah. Um,
anxiety.
so typically when somebody gets in a relationship like that with somebody, again, there's a decent amount of dependency and codependency in that person to be able to withstand that type of relationship. You know, why the person doesn't say like F you within the first 3 weeks when they or 3 months, why they don't leave that. So there's something in that person that the narcissist is drawn to, and it's not coincidence, right? Like it wasn't coincidence that you were younger, that you didn't understand relationships. I mean that's not coincidence, right? So the person then starts to feel like it's their fault, like they should have seen this. And now they're in this and they don't know exactly what's wrong with it because the other person is so good at manipulating that the the significant other doesn't have faith or trust in their own perceptions of what is going on. They they feel crazy, and then if they call the person out on it, the narcissist will go into this tirade of word salad, and you don't even know. They make you so confused that it's so exhausting that you just kind of come out of it feeling crazy, and because your self-esteem is already so low, then you just start to play the role of the crazy girlfriends when you're not. And that prevents you from speaking your mind because you don't want to be viewed as crazy. So you end up holding everything in because you're trying to maintain the peace in the relationship, but of a toxic relationship. So it's not peace, it's manipulative. The walking on eggshells means, the reason why it's so difficult is if you think about gambling and you think about drugs and alcohol, promiscuous sex, all those types of addictive behaviors, they're based on what's called an intermittent reinforcement schedule. And all that is a fancy behavioral word that says you never know what you're going to get. So you keep going, because there's no consistent reinforcement schedule. So if I said to you, I'm going to pay you every 2 weeks, how much anxiety would you have about getting your paycheck? None. If I said to you, I'm only going to pay you when I feel like it. And not only that, I'm not going to tell you what you need to produce or perform in order to get your paycheck. Then you're going to have a ton of anxiety because you don't know. And just when you think you figured it out and you get paid for making 20 sneakers, let's say, but then next week you make 20 and I don't pay you. Well, like what? So it's crazy making. So that is the type of reinforcement schedule that walking on eggshells is. You never know what you're going to get. So you're constantly just on edge. And from a psychological standpoint, not only does it cause a tremendous amount of anxiety and fear and depression, obviously, but it really puts you at risk for PTSD because when people don't know what to expect, if you think about children in abusive relationships, they never know what they're going to get. And the only strategy really a child has in that situation is to completely shut down or to become so hyper vigilant and hyper aware of their surroundings so that they're always ready for something. Take that and translate that into adulthood. That's PTSD. So there's a lot of, you know, acute stress response, post traumatic stress response, and it may not be full PTSD, but it's definitely common. And the reason is because you're so hyper vigilant to is did he smile like a big smile? Was it a little smile? Did he just did is he did he slept this morning? So does that mean he's going to be in a better mood today? I mean, all these things to try to gain control of how he's going to act. And that's that hypervigilance, hyper awareness. So it does a significant amount of damage, and it does a lot of long term damage. It's not just isolated to the relationship; it's going to affect your future relationships unless you work through it.
Yeah. I don't know why when you were talking about that, I was brought to I don't know why, a Taylor Swift song, but there's a line in one of her songs that says, like, "I was a pawn in your chess game and you change the rules every
Yes,
day." And I was
that's exactly right.
yeah. Yeah.
That's
And I
exactly right.
remember when I heard that song, I was like, yeah,
Yep,
she's talking
that's
about, like,
exactly right.
that kind of a relationship. And I
Hmm.
remember when I had, my first therapist tell me, like, "I think you have some PTSD from
Yes,
this relationship," because it was like, am I gonna get the nice person? And am I like, there were a couple times where I was caught looking at someone in a restaurant, a male in a
hmm,
restaurant, and it was
hmm,
like World War
hmm.
III. Like,
Yes,
and so I'm like walking around, like trying not to look at
correct.
other people, and something was fine one
Yeah,
day and then it was not
yeah.
okay. So it's
And you'll realize that as you do that, it's called behavior repertoire. Like at your behaviors, your life, your world starts to shrink the more you try to accommodate their irrational patterns. And as your world shrinks, your anxiety, your depression, risk for PTSD goes high. So it had nothing to do with you looking at another guy. It has to do with them doing whatever they can to make your world so small so that they can take it and put it in their pocket and do what they want with it. So I tell a lot of women especially and men too, don't pay so much attention to what they say they're doing. Look at the underlying function of why they're doing what they're doing. Ignore
yeah,
their words and look at the function of it. What are they trying to do in this situation?
that makes so much sense. And I feel so lucky for all the therapy I have been through, but
Hmm.
because I can even look at it now, I'm, happily married. There are certain things my husband will do, and I like get short of breath, and I'm like,
Yes,
"Oh my, what is this?" And
yes,
I'm so lucky to be in a relationship where I can voice that and say, "Hey, this isn't about you. This
yes.
is like
Good for
something
you.
that came up in my last relationship," but it's because I have been able
Yes,
to, really look into that. Um and I did want to ask you, like, what I mean, what does the process look like of healing someone
yeah,
from that? And I'm gonna plug therapy right now, because anytime
yes,
someone approaches me with that, I'm like, it's deep.
yes,
Like, you have to
yes.
get help.
So first things, congratulations to you, honestly, because I for people that are still in these relationships, know that it's really, really difficult, and I think it's very beneficial that you do what you do because you get so sucked into it, you think no one else is going through this, and so it's very helpful to have somebody on the other side who's gone through it, and they can look at you and say like, okay, she did this, I can do this. So you give people a lot of hope, and I know at least from my followers who I've had follow you, I know they felt that way. So I really just wanted to say thank you for what you're doing because you're
Oh,
helping
thank
a
you.
significant amount of people. Um, and the other thing you said that was really important that I think is part of therapy, but something that I do with all my patients, regardless of something like this or not, when your reaction to a situation is larger than the context that you're in, typically means you're responding to something else, not the situation that you're in. So you're kind of bringing your emotions and your thoughts from a prior experience into this. So, if my son comes in and says, mommy, can you get me juice? I'm just making this up. And let's say, which is a totally benign situation, but let's say I had been in a relationship, a really abusive relationship, and every time he asked me to get him a drink, I knew what that started to mean. He was going to start drinking all day. And then it was, so I could, when my son walks in and say that to me, I could kind of like either get really frazzled or yell at him or do something when I'm responding that way to a very benign situation, but yet it's because it's triggering something from before. So you have to be very aware of your emotional responses in current situations and make sure that they're not disproportionate because you're responding to something else. I
Yeah,
thought
I
that was
heard
very
this.
important that you said that.
I heard this saying once, and I don't even know if this is probably not like the correct term to use anymore, but
Mhm.
someone said, if it's hysterical, it's historical.
Yeah. Oh, I
Um,
love that.
yeah, which I'm like, I don't know if
I'm
hysterical is the
writing
right
that
word to
down.
use
No,
anymore, but
right. It's
I,
right.
yeah,
What
but I
was that? If
always
it's
remember
hysterical,
if
it's
it's
historical.
hysterical, it's historical. Yeah.
I love that. Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
Um, so you asked what can people do? What kind of help they so therapy. I agree with you
Yeah.
completely. You cannot in any way, shape, or form do this alone. For the simple reason that you're so in the toxic dynamic that you can't come up with strategies to get out of it by using the toxic system that you're in. Right. So it's like people try to find solutions, but the solutions they're finding are inside the toxic relationship. So they're not healthy solutions. You need somebody to be objective to it, to be able to pull you outside of it and be able to get you to look at it objectively as if you're watching your relationship on a movie screen and you're in the audience. Um, so therapy, I highly recommend somebody who is either a behavior therapist or somebody who is acceptance and commitment therapy therapist. I think sometimes the danger with this is you want to make sure you don't do simply talk therapy, because what happens with that is you just kind of reiterate, and it's great for something, not for this. You end up just rehashing and rehashing with no actual behavioral steps to take into practice. So it's good for certain things, not for this. This involves a lot of behavior and pattern change. So therapy, for one.
We are officially in a new year, and I know how frustrating it can be to go into a new year still not feeling over your ex or still feeling in so much pain after your breakup. So, if you are looking for even more help and guidance, and trust me, it's okay to not be able to go at this alone, you can get my step by step healing process using one of my courses. So, no matter where you might feel stuck in your breakup, I guarantee there's going to be a course for you. If your breakup just happened and you're feeling completely overwhelmed by the intense feelings and you don't even know how you're going to muster up the ability to go to work, I have my breakup emergency first aid kit. If you feel like you can't stop texting your ex, looking at their social media, or just obsessing about wanting to talk to them, you can get all the tools and accountability you need from my Detox Your Ex course. If some time has passed after your breakup, but you still feel like you can't quite let go, I can help you let go using my Breakthrough Your Breakup course. If you feel like you might be ready to start dating again in 2021, but you're scared to get hurt again or you don't trust yourself to date, I will give you everything you need to feel confident moving forward in my Moving On After Heartbreak course. If you want all of the things I just mentioned, so getting help with your breakup from start to finish, you can grab my signature course, Heal Your Breakup. And for my podcast listeners, you can use the code PODCAST to get $25 off the Heal Your Breakup course price. All of my courses I just mentioned include videos from me, a workbook, and my 90-day breakup journal to help you feel completely supported and guided through this process. And with the new year, I am officially opening up my one on one coaching sessions. So, to get started on that or to learn more, you can head to the link in the show notes or head to my Instagram to apply for coaching and start working with me directly. So, head to the link in my show notes to find more info on my courses, take the quiz to figure out which course is best for you, and to get more info and apply for one to one coaching with me. Now, back to the episode.
The other is you're going to want to slowly reintegrate yourself into society. Start with the people that you feel least vulnerable with. Start with the easy people. Start with the people who love you unconditionally, who will take you back with open arms. And the ones that are a little harder, you'll do over time. And you may also find out as you get healthier that your friendships that you had were similar to the relationship that you had. And as you
Interesting.
start to shift gears, you may find that that dependent person that you were, now that you're stronger, maybe your old friends were so used to you being the punching bag and so used to you being the one to take on all their problems that they could dump and unload on you. And now you're not that person anymore. So now those friendships may not work. So there's a lot of things that happen when people start to change their patterns, which is why therapy is so essential. You absolutely cannot do this alone. This is also something that medication does not fix. Medication doesn't fix patterns. What
Yeah.
medication does is take the edge off and take the anxiety, like tune it down a little bit so that you can retain the information you have in therapy, so that you can get out of bed and go to therapy. But medication doesn't change patterns.
Yeah.
Chances are you are the way you are because you're modeling behaviors you saw growing up, you're modeling relationships you saw growing up, or you're doing the opposite of that modeling to the other extreme, which would be unhealthy. So maybe you were raised by a narcissist and you learned that, the only way to get your needs met was to meet their needs. So you repeat what you know, right? Or a narcissist could grow up being told they're worthless, they're no good, they feel like crap, and then that's how they compensate for it. So it's called a compensatory narcissist. So there's so much and so many layers to this. It's not a quick fix. You will be in therapy for a very long time and you have to commit to doing the hard work.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree so much. And I mean, I still go to therapy.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I
I think
actually went
everybody should go to therapy.
100%. It's so important. And even like,
Mhm.
I'm in a 12-step program. So
Mhm.
I have a sponsor that I work with, and it's
Yes.
like, it's not the same.
Right. Right.
Especially I went through pretty heavy duty EMDR trauma
Mhm.
therapy, which was
Mhm. Mhm.
life
Yes.
changing for
Yes.
me.
Yes.
And just
I forgot
really
EMDR for trauma too. Yes, EMDR, yes, is very, very, very helpful still for PTSD for sure.
it like helped me like file it
Yeah,
away.
and it keeps you present without it kind of consuming you.
Yes,
Mhm.
exactly, exactly,
Mhm.
and I also loved what you said about reintegrating with easy people first. I
Mhm.
didn't even
Mhm.
realize I didn't do this consciously, but I'm so grateful. I had certain friends that I completely lost touch with.
Mhm.
I called them afterwards. I went over to their house, and all they said was, "We missed you."
Yeah,
They did not give me any hard time about being
correct,
in it or, "Where have you
correct.
been? Why did you
They
do
were
this?"
probably so relieved.
They just were like "We missed you so much. Like,
Yes,
let's,
correct.
like, play a game," or it was just
Mhm.
I didn't I felt because I felt so shameful
Of
about it at
course.
first, and
Yeah,
I think the
of course.
process for me that I had to go through was at first I completely disassociated from it and just
Mhm.
distracted and kinda just
Mhm.
tried to go back to normal life,
Mhm.
and then I got angry, and then I was able
Mhm.
to see it, and then I was able to look at it in a way of like, I can see why I attracted this.
Yeah,
Like
exactly,
I
and
was
that's the pattern work.
yeah. So
Mhm.
it had to happen in steps for sure.
Mhm.
And I'd love for you to touch on like the reality warping. I don't know what it's I you used a term when we talked earlier about like how it feels like just a total, for lack of a better word, mind fuck to get out
Yeah,
of a relationship like that
yeah,
where you're like
yeah,
ways up,
yeah.
and it took me a while to, like, get back in touch with that, and is that just because they, utilize gaslighting and they make you feel crazy?
So, yeah, so the crazy making aspect of this. There is, again, it's not coincidence that narcissistic personality disorder gravitates towards people who have dependency issues, who rely on other people to make them feel whole, who feel that they only exist and their sense of purpose only exists to the degree to which they take care of other people. So their view of themselves is largely contingent on how others view them, their opinions of them, what they can do for them. And they really already aren't sure of who they are. They're kind of whoever that person needs them to be. And that is something that a narcissist will smell out from like a million miles away. Um, and they play into that role. In the beginning when that love bombing stage comes in and all the future faking and all that. But what ends up happening is because they make this situation so confusing, because it's so built on that intermittent reinforcement schedule, because you never know what you're going to get. Now you have someone with already low self esteem who has no idea what's going on, because remember, they're used to their self-worth being defined by other people and the degree to which they can help them. The narcissist knows that. So here you make them dinner, steak, let's say, and the narcissist loves it, eats it, says, "This is great, thank you so much." 2 days later, she makes steak again because she wants to please him. But same steak, same temperature, same what wellness, all that stuff. Eats it, says it tastes like shit, throws it against the wall. You suck, you're a horrible cook. And so, and what that does is it solidifies that dependency of that person on them even more, because remember, their self-worth is contingent on them. So it's like again, it's like a drug or gambling. It's like you got it on this day, but you didn't get it on this day, so I'm going to hang in there again until I can get that high again. And it really locks them into it. So not only does that happen, but there's a tendency, because you feel so knocked down and so low, and you've been told for so long that your opinions are wrong and that you're not smart or your opinions don't matter, no one cares about your opinion, you naturally are going to take on the opinions and the viewpoints of the other person because that's all you have access to.
Yeah.
And it's almost like a cult like brainwashing thing that goes on. And I guarantee you, if
Yeah.
you looked at brain, like if MRIs of somebody, who's been brainwashed versus somebody who's been in a narcissistic relationship, or looked at personality traits, they're probably pretty identical. And because the person feels so crappy about themselves, they're happy to hand over the responsibility of themselves to somebody they think will handle it better. And
Yeah.
that's the misconception that people have. So you doubt your reality. You doubt that you're a good person, because if I'm a good person, why is this person so angry with me? You lose touch with your likes, your interests, your identity. I mean, women will say to me, "I literally don't even know what music I like anymore. I don't know
Mhm.
who I am."
Yeah.
And so it's very scary to have to rebuild that. But that's what happens. It truly sucks your soul. It sucks your identity, and you don't realize it until it's too late, because people that try to stop it, they're your enemy, because you've been taught to think, "Oh, your friend Kate, I don't really like her. I can't trust her. I can't put my finger on it, but there's something about her I don't like."
Yep. Oh
Yeah.
my gosh. And
Or, "I don't like their husband. I don't want to hang out with them."
yeah, I'm, oh man, I had so much of that. And I give my parents so much credit because they did not they didn't try to attack it. When all of my siblings, like my older brother used to I found this out later, used to ask my dad every week, like, "When can I beat the shit out of this guy?" And my dad's
Oh.
like, "She's gonna figure it out. Like, she will
So
figure
they
it out."
knew he wasn't a nice guy. They just didn't want to intervene. And you probably would
Yeah,
have dug your heels in and ends up hating them for it. So
exactly.
at least they knew that much. That's helpful. Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. And what the other thing that you were, I mean, so I look back, so I met my narcissistic ex when I was a client at Jenny Craig, the like diet company, and he was my coach. Like, talk about like walking
Power
into it,
differential. Yep.
showing how
Yep.
insecure I am.
Yes. Uh-huh.
So I'm like,
Yep.
wow,
Wow.
that was, yeah, yeah. So it
That's
was,
probably like as good of as an example as I've ever heard.
yeah,
I
and I
mean,
didn't,
yeah.
yeah, and looking back now, I'm like, "Oh my gosh," like, I was
Yeah.
just like, "Hello, I'm
Yeah.
very insecure, I need
Correct.
someone to help me," and all that,
Correct.
and what you were talking about too with, like, the subtle changes, and this is why I think a lot of people are like, "Well, why don't you just leave? Like, it's clearly bad," but it's like, there's so much, the
Mm-hmm.
concept of grooming, it's like, all of a
Yep.
sudden it was, "I wanna take you to, like, like, my favorite restaurant, and, like, I'll
Mm-hmm.
get your like, I'll order for you," like, 'cause I and it's like,
Mm-hmm.
"Oh, cool." They're
Mm-hmm. Oh,
like,
it's so romantic. Yes. They're
yeah,
taking
they're, like,
charge.
they're taking charge,
Yes.
and then it was like, "Oh, I really like this outfit on you." All of a sudden turned into, anytime I went shopping, I sent him pictures of what
Yes.
I was thinking of getting, and he made the
Yes.
decisions. And it
Yes.
was, oh, and then it started getting like, oh, like, yeah, my ex, like, all my ex-girlfriends were blonde or something like that. And then all of a sudden I was blonde. And like, it was so wild. It
Mhm.
was like this
Mhm.
this
You lose yourself.
completely lost myself. And I
Mhm.
didn't know what my favorite color is or what my favorite
Right,
music was when I came out.
right,
Yeah.
right. I have a story I post occasionally. It's in my highlight section as to why people don't leave these relationships. If you're that bad, why can't you leave? And there's a couple reasons. One, sometimes it's abusive and physically abusive, and it's not that easy to get out because of safety reasons. Two, if there's children involved, it becomes so much more difficult. And so you have to be very careful how you go about that. And the third thing is that, like you were talking about, it's like being left handed your entire life and then all of a sudden being made to think that you're right-handed, even though you're not good at it. But if you work on it enough, then you can use your right hand to the point where now you even forget that you were even left-handed. And if you go to right with your left hand, it doesn't work anymore. It's like it's that ingrained and that embedded that it becomes you don't even realize you have options. Like
Hmm.
people don't even realize like you can leave because it's not even in their awareness. And so when people say, "Well, he's such an asshole, why can't you leave?" You can't expect them to understand that, and people need to kind of respect that other people are not going to understand it if they haven't been through it.
Yeah.
You're basically in your eyes leaving the only person who is able to hold you up in this world
Yeah.
and that you will not make it if you leave them. It's that scary. And
Yeah.
so people who do leave, like yourself, I mean, I say this all the time. Somebody who has left somebody with a true narcissistic personality disorder and who left is probably one of the strongest, like the strongest people that I have ever met, ever. I mean, it's unlike anything I have ever seen.
Yep.
I-
Yeah. And
It's mind blowing.
what finally got me to leave is I was in the middle of like the height of my alcoholism, was on a family vacation, got blackout drunk
Did you start your drinking after you met him?
before.
Before? Okay.
So I will say the one thing I can look at, he was very controlling with my drinking to the point where like
Hmm.
he'd be like, "We'll go to this party, you can have 2 drinks." And like if he saw me go for a third, he would call me out in front of everyone.
Hmm.
So that was actually a blessing because I do think he kind of helped keep that in control for me. But
In his weird
I
way.
in his weird
Yes.
way.
Hmm.
Um, but I got so drunk that I told my siblings everything. Like,
Wow.
I told them everything because there was a couple incidences where I did self-harm when he threatened to break up with me.
Uh-huh.
Um, that happened 2 different
Yep.
times. So I had, like,
Because
these.
you truly believe that you won't make it if they do.
Yep, that he was just in control of everything anyway, so it's like, I don't even
Hmm.
have a say in this anyway.
And a lot of times when people, I mean, I'm so happy that you didn't do that. A lot of
Yeah,
times when people go to that place of self-harm or cutting or just or thinking about killing themselves, the reason why they do that, and same with eating disorders, same with drinking, it's the one thing you can control that they can't.
yeah, yeah,
You can control whether you harm yourself or not.
yeah.
So even though it's maybe not that you wanted to end your life or you wanted
No.
to, it was just something that you was yours that no one could take from you. And that's how trapped you were, that the only thing you had control over was life or death.
Yeah. Yeah, and it was
And
finally, like, after saying that out loud and just realizing, like, I'm just not someone that's done that. Like, I was
right,
such a happy
right.
kid, all of these things, and finally, it was the first time I had said anything that happened out loud, and I heard it
Yes.
come out of my mouth, and I was like, "Oh, this has to be
Wow.
done. Like, this
Uh-huh.
just has to be done," and that's one thing that I tell people, I'm
And you said that
obviously.
to your siblings?
I said that to my siblings, and they didn't rush me because it took me, like, 6 more months to actually
Yeah.
walk away,
Yeah,
and
sure.
think
Right.
they just kinda, my brother let me move in with him afterwards, and,
Mhm.
um but what I tell people is, like, it's so important to tell people what happened
Yes.
when you're ready, and
And it
maybe
breaks
even,
that
like, a little
shame
bit before
cycle.
you're ready. Yeah,
Mhm.
because everyone knows someone that's been through it. It's like
Yep.
alcoholism, like, there used to be such a
Yep.
stigma, but now it's like everyone knows
Mhm.
someone who's in
That's
that,
right.
so, and also just, like, I think the more people know, like, the more I said it out loud, the more I knew I wouldn't go back.
Mhm. And more importantly too, when you say it out loud to people who are in your support network and they don't run and they don't not believe you, and they help you, you that that shame starts to dissipate because you're realizing that that sharing behavior that you're doing is being reinforced in a healthy way. So you're more likely to do it again because they're helping remove that shame and that guilt. They're not bashing it. They're not making you feel bad or worse for having those feelings. So that's really important, to find people who will help you with that so that that shame can decrease, and that secrecy and all of that, because that's a load to carry.
Do you think people that hang on to the shame and the guilt are more likely to repeat the pattern? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm shaking my head like that.
Yeah.
Yes, I do. I do, only because the best way to avoid feeling shame and feeling guilt is to engage in something. I shouldn't say that. The A lot of people who aren't willing to sit with the shame and the discomfort and work through that, they do things to avoid it. And we tend to repeat what we know and what's familiar. And one of the things that had always taken away their shame and their guilt was to kind of focus on somebody else, right? Take care of somebody else so they don't have to focus on themselves. And so, you know, they will seek out somebody yet again to take care of that maybe isn't as severe as a narcissist, or maybe not, but they're still going to seek out somebody to take care of, to give them a sense of purpose, to not have to feel that shame and that guilt. And
Wow. Yeah.
anytime you engage in a behavior with the purpose of it to avoid internal discomfort rather than sitting with it, 99% of the time, whatever that behavior is actually escalating those feelings you're trying to get rid of.
Interesting. Wow. It's so interesting. Honestly feel like I could talk to you for forever. Would but I would love you to tell everyone where they can find you, and would love to
Sure.
have you on again because I feel like you
Yeah,
are just
absolutely.
such a wealth of knowledge. So
Oh,
yeah, so where
thank
can
you.
people find you, follow you?
Sure. So I'm on Instagram, and it is dr period z underscore psychologist. And then my website is DrJaimezUckerman. Um, and Facebook, Dr. Jamie Zuckerman. I'd say Instagram probably the best place to find me. That's where I post the most things. I
Yeah.
have in my highlight section a lot of stuff on relationships and narcissism. So happy to answer any questions.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'll put, all of your information and links in the show
Great.
notes as well, but thank you so much for coming on. I will say, even just talking to you now, I honestly have a better understanding of what happened and what that looks like even after all the years of therapy
Hmm.
that I've been through.
Hmm.
So, and again, wanna give another plug to therapy, like, whether
Yes,
reach out to Dr. Z, or find, there's so many great resources now to go to
there
therapy.
are.
And
And I just learned too, I don't know the name of it, but I can find it. There's like on the go text therapy now where you can just
oh
text the
wow.
therapist and they give you kind of like in the moment strategies. I mean, that's super helpful too, because then you don't have to unload, but at the same time, you have somebody who could kind of give you some objective direction. So I'm all for therapy. I've been in therapy. Everyone I know has been in therapy. I just think it should be just as common as going to a primary care doctor. I mean, they're so connected. So why not? And I think, between the work that you do and you coming out and sharing your story, it just helps to break that stigma. So,
Yeah. Yeah, and I would say too, like, I've looked at therapy in the past as like, wow, this is like, an expense and all that stuff, and like, but I will tell you, all the times that, like, even I was stretching to afford
yeah,
therapy, it was like, for me, I would give up, like, I would cut so many other expenses
correct.
before therapy, because for me it
Correct.
is like, it's so important, especially if you're
Hmm.
someone that's coming out of a toxic relationship.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yep. You need that objectivity to keep pulling you out.
Yeah. And I will even say all of my coaching clients, or I'd say 90% of them, also go to therapy. It's like
Yeah.
it's just different.
Yeah.
Like I
Yeah.
can't do what a therapist does.
Mhm.
And I
Mhm.
can do some stuff that a therapist can't.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
um
Exactly.
well,
Exactly.
thank you so much
Thank
again.
you for having me. This was so great. This is yeah, and thank you for what you do.
I hope you enjoyed today's show. If you loved it, I hope you'll leave me a review and share with your friends. If you're interested in learning more about my course, Heal Your Breakup, where I take you step by step through my entire healing process, you can find more info at my website, breakupbestie.com. And if you're new, don't forget to join our private Facebook group so you can connect with other women going through the same thing and seek support. You can search Breakup Bestie Support Group on Facebook to join. Lastly, if you're not already following me on Instagram, I share new tips and support every single day. You can find me at Your Breakup Bestie. Most importantly, hang in there, stay connected with loved ones, be nice to yourself, and remember, it's all going to be okay. I promise.